Tell me, Muse, of the man of many ways, who was driven far journeys after he had sacked Troy's sacred citadel. Many were those whose cities he saw, whose minds he learned of, many the pains he suffered in his spirit on the wide sea, struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. Even so, he could not save his companions, hard though he strove to. They were destroyed by their own wild recklessness, fools who devoured the oxen of Helios, the sun god, and he took away the day of their homecoming. From some point here, goddess, daughter of Zeus, speak and begin our story. These are the first 10 lines of Homer's famous epic poem, the Odyssey, one of the great works of literature in the Western tradition or anywhere else. The words are already poignant and evocative of many of the ideas that we will see expanded on throughout the entirety of Homer's epic. It refers to man as the man Homer, Odysseus as polytropos, which our translator Lattimore translates as the man of many ways. I believe that's his rendering of it. Other authors have chosen to translate it, yes, as cunning or clever or of different capacities. Tropos is a turn, and I think it's the most literal of the translations, and it has the beauty of capturing a few things about Odysseus. One, that he is cunning and renowned for his cunning, just as his patroness Athena is. So there's a sort of wisdom about him. And on the other hand, of his many wanderings and turns, because we enter the Odyssey with a man who has been at sea away from his family for now 20 years. And in the midst of those 20 years, he has been on many journeys and has gone many ways. And this journey that the Odyssey describes is one of homecoming, a word that's used a few times in the first 10 lines here. He longs for a homecoming, as do his companions. He will have one, they will not, because of their folly. Now, this word homecoming in Greek is the word nostos, from which we get our the English word nostalgia, the pain at at coming home. So when we use the word nostalgia, we think of it as a good feeling, a sort of a reverie, a sense of familiarity with something of the past. I think that is largely the product of the fact that we are largely a rootless society, and we long for any point of recognition. So for nostalgia for us is a sense of rootedness in a past of which the present no longer corresponds. It's part of and parcel of the modern technological age. But for Odysseus, the thought of home is one of pain, algos, nostalgia, as they say, pain in German. It's Heimweh, the pain at the thought of home. And the pain comes from the fact that he isn't home and longs to be back home. On the other hand, I want to say just very briefly, I won't go on at this about this at any length, but it's part of the fame of Odysseus, his kleos, to use the Greek word, that he should return home after so long a voyage and so long a departure from his friends and his family and his kingdom. So Odysseus's fame is bound up in his return home. Indeed, if he does not return home, he will not be the famous man that he is said to be. And this is a direct contrast to the man who was at the center of the previous epic by Homer, namely Achilles, whose fame, his kleos, was bound up in the fact that he had chosen not to return home. That was the choice that was placed before him, either to do great deeds of which other men and other cultures would sing for time immemorial, the deeds of great Achilles at Troy, and yet he would fall there, or he could return home and live to a ripe old age, and yet without the fame, and Achilles chose the fame. Likewise, Odysseus will choose his fame, but his fame will not come at the cost of his life here. So those first lines, and remember what I said when I spoke to you privately the other day. What's really interesting here in the first 10 lines of the Iliad is he speaks to the muse, and he speaks of the need to remember. And let me say what I said in that little interaction that we had the other day. There were 9 muses. The muses were the daughters of Zeus, and their father was Zeus. Their mother was not a muse herself, but their mother was named Mnemosyne, Mnesomyne, and Mnemosyne was the goddess of memory. And the 9 muses, the one being spoken of here is Calliope, the goddess of epic poetry. The inspiration that the poet, in this case Homer, is calling upon the muse for in order to recount this story of the Odyssey is one that is entirely dependent on memory. And so inspiration flows out of something that is deeply rooted in the poet's memory. And indeed, it's not just his memory, it's been passed on from generation to generation through memorized texts. And the inspiration will arise out of those memories. And so what we have here is a very interesting, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but a very interesting contrast between the modern view of inspiration as something that is utterly novel and based on a flash of inspiration, of creative genius that has no precedent, and that which was certainly the case in the ancient world, whether it's amongst the Greeks or the Romans or the biblical writers, the idea that there is something of the past that we need to hold on to in order for present inspiration to even happen. And that's certainly the case here. So he calls upon the muse in order to remind himself of something of utmost significance that he needs to recount with a great deal of accuracy. And with that in mind, it is worth mentioning that Homer's Odyssey, and like all of Homer's works, were recounted by rhapsodes. This Greek word rhapsode, Rhapsode, were professional singers. So Homer's epic poems were recounted, accompanied by the lyre with song in the midst of a hall. And the function of these poetic renditions, these performances, was both entertaining but also educative. And Homer was regarded, and this was the phrase that was used of him, as the teacher of all Hellas, Hellas being the Greek word for Greece. So all of the various cities, states that comprised the Hellenic Empire would have regarded Homer as their great teacher. And so with that in mind, the role of the rhapsode, or the singer, was that not only of an entertainer, as we would have much of our singers be, but also of a profoundly important teacher. And I say that because, once again, I'm pointing out the significance of memory here. These are things that are truths, deep truths, wrapped up in poetic form and conveyed from generation to generation. Now, they began in an oral fashion, and they were carried forth in an oral fashion. But what's interesting is that there was a time in which they were finally put down in a form which would no longer allow for deviations. In other words, a written form, and that was under the stewardship of a Greek ruler by the name of Pisistratus. He ruled between 561 and 527 BC. He's also, by the way, the ruler who instituted the Pan-Athenic Games, which we know in its modern form by the Olympic Games. So Pisistratus regarded that it to be of utmost importance that there not be any deviations. For the sake of memory, this must now be written down, not simply recounted on the memories of the oral tradition. It must become a written document. When the actual Battle of Troy took place, and whether it even took place, is one of the questions of the Enlightenment period. Did it actually take place? Whether it took place, there's certainly in the early part of the Enlightenment, let's say the 17th and early 18th century, some question of whether there was even a place called Troy, whether this battle took place, and whether the account was anything other than mythological. And that question was not truly ever resolved until the 19th century, when a man by the name of Schliemann, and I'm grabbing here a little image here if I can find it, found and excavated the lost city of Troy. Let's see if I can hold this up here. This is a saddle, a leather saddle, depicting, among other things, the horses along here carrying from Troy, carrying the Trojan horse into that that famous city. And Schliemann found this site in the confines, a little off the coast of in modern Turkey, in Asia Minor. The reason that there was some doubt about whether the fact that Troy had even existed is because the coastline where Troy was said to have been posited was not found. And so the idea arose that this must have been a myth. What they neglected to consider was the fact that there would have been that the coast might have moved through sedimentation and so forth. And indeed, that was the case. So Troy was found further up from the Mediterranean Sea and excavated by Schliemann. And you can look that up online. I've got the picture I cited to you was in a recent National Geographic article. I think it was 2018. So not that very long ago. And when he did that, he excavated and found this terrific repository. In fact, he found what often takes place in archaeological finds. He's found a city on top of a city on top of a city and so forth. And when you dug down, you could find a vast treasury of goods, among other things, what was called Agamemnon's mask, this gold, terrific gold mask, some of which are found in the Athenian museums, and some of the foundations, I think they're in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. At any rate, that settled the dispute of whether there was actually an ancient Troy or whether this was simply a myth that was told for the purposes of education, but based on pure myth without any foundation. While this was, in fact, clearly a site, and one that had established as a certain fact that the Battle of Troy had taken place, which many perhaps ought not to have doubted, but they did doubt. At any rate, the sack of Troy, it is believed, took place somewhere around the time of 1200 BC. The battle between the Trojans on the one hand and the Greeks on another. Let me give you a potted history of that story. The story is basically that Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek force, was the husband of a woman by the name of Helen. And Helen was said to be the most beautiful woman in the entire world. And she was nonetheless taken from Menelaus back to Troy. And Menelaus and the Greek soldiers lay siege to Troy for 10 years in order to get Helen back. And so in the famous lines, this was the face that launched 1,000 ships. and they were at war for 10 years before Troy finally fell. And those 10 years among those Greek heroes were this man Odysseus, Achilles, Agamemnon, Atlas, a variety of different Greek heroes. The account of that is told in, if I can find it here, Homer's Iliad. We're not going to read Homer's Iliad, although I recommend that you do that sometime. It's terrific work in its own right. But that's the account of the Battle of Troy. This work that we're looking at here, the Odyssey, is of the homecoming of one of the heroes of the Battle of Troy, namely, once again, Odysseus. And it begins with this invocation of a muse, because the poet here wants to tell a story which he believes is beyond his capacity and is too important for a man simply to tell willy-nilly. He must tell it accurately and he must tell it beautifully. And with respect to the beautiful telling of the tale, I want to just briefly look at some of the features of the Odyssey. And I'm going to hold up here a little demonstration of the narrative structure of the Odyssey here. Now you can see here, as I've got here, that the structure is very artfully constructed indeed. So if we thought that simply by virtue of the fact that it was an oral epic, that it was rather aimless, that it was this happened and then this happened and then this happened, a careful look at the narrative structure of the poem shows a very carefully crafted and artfully rendered poem. So books 1 to 4 begin in Ithaca. Likewise, the concluding books of the Odyssey, so books 14 to 24, likewise take place in Ithaca. Whereas in books 6 to 8, the setting is among the land of the Phaeacians, likewise in book 13. And in between of all that, in the meat of the book, in the center of the book, books 9 to 12, we are being told of the wanderings of Achilles. So in the center of the book is this story that Odysseus will tell to the Phaeacians about what had happened between the fall of Troy and his coming to them. So there's a story within the story told by Odysseus to his audience, and his audience includes not only the Phaeacians, but of course us, in our case, the reader, but in the Greek case, the audience who's hearing a story about stories, and it's sung by, in part, it's told by Odysseus, but in part, it's sung by various rhapsodes that are themselves within the story. Among others, there's Demodocus and so forth. So the importance of singers and of tale and of memory is being represented here. But note the artful construction. And the bookending, as it were, and there's a sense of the heart of the story being expressed in the structure of the Odyssey itself. So at the center of Ithaca is, of course, the return home to Ithaca, and Ithaca is the native land of Odysseus. But of course, within the center of the narrative structure is the wanderings. So the wanderings are at the center of the Odyssey. And of course, as I said at the outset, Odysseus is the man of many turnings, many wanderings. Now, that's one of the things that I want to draw to your attention. Another is of a sort of a parallel, and this forms the thematic structure of the Odyssey. And namely, that's a conflict between two gods. So Homer at the outset is appealing to a god, namely Calliope, the epic muse, in order to help him tell the tale of the Odyssey. So the gods are going to be a part of that story from the outset, simply by the virtue of the fact that he appeals to the gods. But it's also going to feature as narrative figures in conflict two gods, namely Athena on the one hand, who favors Odysseus and is going to help him return home. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, also the native, the patroness of Athens itself, often represented as a wise old owl. And on the other hand, Poseidon, the brother of Zeus. Poseidon will seek to impede Odysseus's homecoming and rob him of his fame in the process. And we will learn why that is shortly. But I'll give away the plot. It's because Odysseus blinded his son Polyphemus on his wanderings. And so he cried out to his father to avenge him. And of course, Poseidon was outraged that his son had been blinded by this man, Odysseus, and he prevented him from coming home. So this is the conflict between the two gods. Athena, who wants to honor the man who honors her and is most like her, and Poseidon, who wants to avenge the blinding of his son and finds there's an injustice that one of the mortals has dared to harm his one of his family, as it were. So the family and the gods are one of the dynamics that drive the text. And within that, I want to draw to your attention one final structure here, which is interesting. And this is the narrative parallels that Homer draws here between two different families, two different Greek heroes who are seeking to return home from the Trojan War. On the one hand, there is the family of Agamemnon. Now, Agamemnon, as I said, was the leader of the Greek force that sacked Troy. Not a highly likable character, but he was the leader of all of the forces of Greece. He returned home and famously was murdered when he returned home by a man by the name of Aegisthus, who had shacked up with his wife Clytemnestra in his absence. And when he returned, rather than greeting the war hero, they plotted to murder him. And not only plotted, but succeeded in doing so. And this was presented as a grave crime, that he should be treated so. But his son Orestes avenged his father's death by doing a terrible thing, not by killing Aegisthus, but also by avenging his father's blood on his mother. Now, this is not a good act, and so the action is not unambiguous in its purging of the crime that has been done. Nonetheless, it is praised by the sky gods, of whom Zeus is the chief representative. And so the parallel, or the fate of Agamemnon on returning home, is going to be presented to the audience as a sort of a foil for what will happen with Odysseus, because Odysseus, seeking to come home, is going to return to his own wife, whose name is Penelope, famous in her own right, who is being besieged not by one man, but by a whole host of suitors who are seeking to eat her out of house and home. And quite frankly, they want to marry her and take away Odysseus's kingdom and thereby rob him of all his honor and glory. If they succeed in marrying her, Odysseus will also have been foiled. So there's a threat on the home front, and the threat runs directly parallel to that which Agamemnon had faced. And simply by raising the fate of Agamemnon, there is a tension in the text of what will happen. I mentioned that Orestes had avenged his father. We will meet Odysseus' son, Telemachus, and Orestes' example is always being held up to Telemachus as one that he ought to follow if he is likewise to be a just and good man as his father Odysseus was. So those are the sort of some of the basic structures I think I'd like to draw to your attention here. See if I can get that without falling. And that's how Homer begins this story. So there's, as I say, a sort of a parallel between the Iliad and the Odyssey. Firstly, in the fact that they have the same author, Homer. Homer who was reputed to be blind, in addition to all the other wonderful things about Homer. Whether Homer was the original author, being one author, whether there were multiple Homers, whether there was that Homer is a pseudonym for all of the oral traditions and so forth. My personal view is that there was a single author that compiled all of these oral stories and wrote and penned them, whether he was the original author or the later one. I mean, Pisistratus was clearly the one who gathered up the things, but I think there's an original author that brought them together as they did. But there were certainly criticisms of this up to this point. So there was a German scholar by the name of F.A. Wolf, who argued that the Iliad and the Odyssey were simply patchworks formed by several different authors from several stories over a lengthy period of time. I don't see what's gained by that view, but it's parallel to the view of the construction of the Bible, that it's a compilation of different authors in different ages, and constructed as such, rather than being inspired by God with various human authors writing it down, but the construction is due to later works. And so you will have you'll hear the historical critical account of the sources of biblical inspiration. But as I say, Heinrich Schliemann found the city of Troy, and with that established something of the veracity of the historical account, which to some degree establishes the veracity of Homer himself, because there's no dispute that Homer, amongst the ancients, that there was a man called Homer who had written this, and we have no reason really to doubt it, other than the fact that it has clear signs of oral origins. With all that said, we are going to begin, as I said at the outset, in books 1 to 4. We're going to begin in Ithaca, and Odysseus is not there. His son is, and his son is now a young man who has grown up without a father. And this is an interesting situation to find oneself in. And it's one in which many people in our day find themselves in, largely for different reasons, but still growing up fatherless. And so we meet Telemachus at the outset. Part of Odysseus's own fame will be caught up in what his son and heir will do. Will he be a good man, or will he be a man who has been ravaged by growing up without a father and lacking in the heroism and virtuous qualities of his father? That's how we find Telemachus at the outset. He's a man who does not know how to act. He's had no example in his life, no father figure. And for that reason, although he is in his stature very much like his father, indeed he resembles him apparently, the comment is made a few points, he doesn't act like his father did. And so one of the things that in these first 4 books, which are by critics called the Telemachy, because it's the figure of interest here is the son, Telemachos, is in how Athena is going to mentor Telemachus to become more manly and more virtuous. And she will appear in the guise of a figure, an older man, whose name happens to be Mentor. And this is where we get the word mentor. It's often used in Christian circles of somebody of a wise counselor. And it's taken not from scripture per se, it's taken directly from this figure in the Odyssey. But the Odysseus that we meet here in the first few lines is a man of legend. We're not close to him. He's a figure that we have heard about, but we have not yet met. And as the story progresses, as we get closer to hear of his pains and his struggles, we won't actually meet him, by the way, till book 5. And you'll note here on my little sketch of the narrative structure that I omitted book 5 because it doesn't fit the narrative structure. Book 5 takes place on the island, on an island that lies in Ogygia rather, and it's the center of the universe. But we don't know where it is. He's on the island of Calypso. Calypso being a goddess who has been delighting in Odysseus's presence. And yet he's not been delighting in her presence because Calypso has been hiding him away from the world and preventing him from achieving not only his nostos, his homeward return, but also his kleos, his fame. And so the question is, can a man, even one like Odysseus, who has been promised eternal life, as he is promised by Calypso, Can a man who's been promised eternal life and feeding on the food of the gods and living with a nymph and having this eternal life, can he actually be a real man? And it seems to me that Homer presents it that it is not the case. So a man who has eternal life and yet does not have the fame of a man is not truly a man. He's neither a god nor a man. He's a sort of an odd figure. And when we meet him, and I'm skipping ahead a bit to the account of book 5, which we'll look at next time. In book 5, we'll see Odysseus on the shores weeping at the fact that he is with the nymph. As beautiful as she is, she's depriving him of something that is central to his humanity, which is the presence of his family and his worldly fame. And it's a really interesting observation. So virtue, the virtue which ought to gird a man's life, Odysseus is being deprived simply by living in an island of pleasure and eternity. And so something is being said by the Greeks about the importance of virtue and of fame, which is the glorification of that virtue. But at this point, as I say, at the outset of the Odyssey, he is simply a man of legend. We're not close to him at all. The scene shifts in Book 10 from the invocation of the muse, which is one of the characteristic features of an epic, to shift to the council of the gods. I'll read some of the other lines here at the introduction, because Homer introduces a variety of considerations here, some of which I've already mentioned. So in verse 10, we concluded with Homer calling upon the goddess, the daughter of Zeus, to speak and begin our story. And then he goes on and says, "Then all the others, as many as fled sheer destruction, were at home now, having escaped the sea and the fighting. This one alone, longing for his wife and his homecoming, was detained by the queenly nymph Calypso, bright among goddesses, in her hollowed caverns, desiring that he should be her husband. But when in the circling of the years that very year came in which the gods had spun for him his time of homecoming to Ithaca, not even then was he free of his trials, nor among his own people. But all the gods pitied him, except Poseidon. He remained relentlessly angry with godlike Odysseus until his return to his own country. But Poseidon was gone now to visit the far Ethiopians, most distant of men, who live divided, some at the setting of Hyperion, some at his rising." So these are the people that where the sun rises. They're a dark-skinned people touched by the sun in the midst of this. And he is Poseidon, to receive a hecatomb of bulls and rams, a praise offering of the blood of bulls and rams. There he sat at the feast and took his pleasure. Meanwhile, the other Olympian gods were gathered together in the halls of Zeus. First among them to speak was the father of gods and mortals, for he was thinking in his heart of stately Aegisthus, whom Orestes, Agamemnon's far-famed son, had murdered. Remembering, he spoke now before the immortals. Now, so this is interesting. While the conflict, as I say, is largely between Athena and Poseidon, and yet on the heart of the father of gods and mortals, that is of men, namely Zeus, is the fate of Odysseus. And he is minded of the fate of another man, namely Agamemnon, and what happened to him when he returned home at the hands of Aegisthus. And so right away, Homer is introducing to us a terrible deed that is so awful that it's on the mind of Zeus, and it is the thing that drives Zeus to intercede here and act. But let me read his words here. "Oh, for shame," says Zeus, "how the mortals put the blame upon us, gods, for they say evils come from us. But it is they, rather, who by their own recklessness win sorrow beyond what is given. As now lately, beyond what was given, Aegisthus married the wife of Atreus' son, Atreus' son being Agamemnon, and murdered him on his homecoming, though he knew it was sheer destruction, for we ourselves had told him, sending Hermes, the mighty watcher, Arge Fontes, the slayer of Argos, not to kill the man, nor court his lady for marriage, for vengeance would come on him from Orestes, son of Atrides, again another word for Agamemnon, whenever he came of age and longed for his own country. So Hermes told him, but for all his kind intention, he could not persuade the mind of Aegisthus. And now he has paid for everything. So this is Zeus's meditation in looking upon this situation. He's so troubled by it. He is talking about this, and he is clearly feeling the sting of the charges that men have been making. I don't know why the gods are so concerned about what men think of them, but he is stung by the claim that men make that the gods are fating them with terrible fate, and his countercharge is that they bring bad things upon them that go even beyond what they're fated to have. And with this in mind, I wanted to say a very brief word before going back to the text about the role of fate. Now, and I need to say this because we think, when we think of gods and fate, we think of these things of gods as having the control of fate or destiny. And that's because as Christians, we believe that God is not only all powerful, but all seeing and all knowing, and that he predestines things to happen. That's the power of God, that he can determine events to transpire. But that is not the portrait of the gods in the Homeric polytheistic account. The gods are, in fact, and Zeus among them being the one that is chiefly tasked with the responsibility to carry out what is fated and to make clear that it happens. But the fates themselves are divine, and Zeus himself cannot deviate from what is fated. So Zeus himself is not in control of destiny. Rather, he is the instrument of making sure that what is fated is carried out. And what is fated of the fates is something that the fates decide. So Zeus is not all powerful. And we can see that by virtue of the fact that there are other gods and other gods that can thwart him and resist him. And in fact, the gods that Homer presents in some ways are not very godlike at all. Not only are they not omnipotent or omniscient, they also seem to be immoral. And this is one of the charges that was made about the Greek gods, and one of the reasons the philosophers disputed the role of Homer and the epic poets in the education of the young. And so the philosophers, and I'll come to that when we look at Plato's charge, speaking on behalf of many of the philosophers of his age, about the education of the young, that they are basing their account of the gods on lies and presenting the gods as conducting themselves immorally, which Plato says cannot be. No god who would be a god would be able to counsel immorality, let alone do immoral things. But the gods, as Homer portrays them, most certainly do those things. So I needed to say that. So the fates, Zeus himself is subject to the fates, and he cannot change what is fated. It's his task to make sure what is fated happened, and it is fated that Odysseus return home, and yet he has not returned home. And it was fated that if Aegisthus murdered Agamemnon, that he himself would die at the hands of his son Orestes. And he was told this by Hermes, says Zeus, and yet he did it anyway. So he's brought his own fate on his head. Yes, but with that in mind, now Athena, being wise and crafty, sees her opportunity. I can connect the story of Agamemnon with the story of Odysseus, and so she goes on to do that right here. Then in turn, the goddess, gray-eyed Athena, answered him, son of Cronos, our father, O lordliest of the mighty, Aegisthus indeed has been struck down in a death well merited. Let any other man who does thus perish as he did. But the heart in me is torn for the sake of wise Odysseus, unhappy man, who still, far from his friends, is suffering griefs on the sea-washed island, the navel of all the waters, a wooded island, and there a goddess has made her dwelling place. She is daughter of malignant Atlas, who has discovered all the depths of the sea, and himself sustains the towering columns which bracket earth and sky and hold them together. This is his daughter. She detains the grieving unhappy man, and ever with soft and flattering words she works to charm him to forget Ithaca. And yet Odysseus, straining to get sight of the very smoke uprising from his own country, longs to die. But you, Olympian, the heart in you is heedless of him. Did not Odysseus do you grace by the ships of the Argives, making sacrifice in wide Troy? Why, Zeus, are you now so harsh with him? Then in turn Zeus, who gathers the clouds, made answer, my child, what sort of word escaped your teeth's barrier? How could I forget Odysseus the godlike? He who is beyond all other men in mind, and who beyond others has given sacrifice to the gods, who hold wide heaven. It is the earth encircler, Poseidon, who, ever relentless, nurses a grudge because of the Cyclops, whose eye he blinded. For Polyphemus, the Cyclops, like a god whose power is greatest over all the Cyclops. Thausa, a nymph, was his mother, and she was daughter of Phorcus, lord of the barren salt water. She in the hollows of the caves had lain with Poseidon. For his sake, Poseidon, shaker of the earth, although he does not kill Odysseus, yet drives him back from the land of his fathers. So don't blame me. It's not my fault. I'm not preventing Odysseus from coming home. It's Poseidon who's doing it. But come, let all of us who are here work out his homecoming, and see to it that he returns. Poseidon shall put away his anger, for all alone and against the will of the other immortal gods united, he can accomplish nothing. So they will gang up on him in his absence, and they will work out what has been fated to happen. So interesting account, gives us something of the a revelation of how the gods of the ancient Greek understanding were not like our understanding of God. And likewise, we're motivated by personal affiliation and revenge, not merely by notions of truth or justice, as the God of the Bible is presented as. So they're polytheists, and they are not virtuous in their nature. But on the other hand, you can appeal to concepts like justice, and they seem to recognize them. It just doesn't characterize them. And the philosophers will come along and say it must. If they are gods, they must be equally moral in nature, as well as powerful and eternal in nature, or immortal. So Homer gets his story in gear by having the gods initiate the action in the play. And note that the fate and the will of the gods is not the same thing, once again. So Zeus speaks of Agamemnon here, and the conflict between the two gods, Athena and Poseidon, it runs parallel to the conflict between Odysseus and other men. And there's a sort of a hubris that Odysseus will have exhibited in presenting himself in this position. And the hubris was that of blinding Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and even more foolishly revealing to him his name. And that's how he is able to appeal to his father and prevent him from getting home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We haven't heard of that story yet. So the character and image of Athena is in some sense the personification and embodiment of Odysseus. And that's why she favors him. He so resembles her that she wants her virtue and her wisdom to prevail over the anarchy and power of Poseidon, which is much like that of the waves. There's power there, but there's no wisdom. And so one of the things which I think is being stated here in a mythological form is of the significance of wisdom and of being able to overcome the anarchy which often characterizes the world. And so the images of the sea, which dominate the entire epic, represent chaos and disorder. And they are ruled by, again, the figure of Poseidon, whereas the images of the land represent peace and order and justice, and they seem to represent Athena. So at the sort of mythological level of the elemental level, we almost seen that these two, the clash between the water and the land, and the sky gods taking the side of the land as opposed to the sea. Now, Athena, as I say, intercedes here to her father against his brother to do something about bringing Odysseus home, because Odysseus has been a virtuous man who has always praised the gods and given them sacrifices. Zeus is very pleased to do what his daughter implores him to do, and she will be the main architect of the action henceforward. And she, at this point, she will leave the Council of the Gods, and again, the Council of the Gods is one of the primary features of an epic. And she will go down and go to Ithaca to visit Penelope and her son Telemachus. But at the beginning of the story, she will find that the mother of Telemachus, Penelope, and Telemachus don't know what's happened to him, namely their husband / father. His whereabouts are unknown, and they are in a state of despair, as one might expect after 20 years. Penelope has been faithful. She's been holding on, hope against hope, that he might return home. But quite frankly, at this point, she no longer really believes that he will return home. And she is at the mercy of the suitors who she's been putting off by means of deceit. She's been weaving a web on her loom, claiming to be constructing a shroud for her father-in-law Laertes. When he dies, he'll have a burial shroud, and when she finishes that, she promises the suitors that she will marry one of them. She'll give her verdict finally. But what she does artfully is, by day, while she's weaving the shroud, by night she unweaves it. And for some reason, they have not yet realized that that's what she's doing. I think the wine in Ithaca must be very good indeed, and because this has gone on for years. That's quite the trick. But the deceit here, which Penelope uses, the word is dolos, D-O-L-O-S, is that which marks the virtue of a woman. And it's one of her means of arete, of excellence. And excellence is the primary thing which is being promoted throughout the epics. And it's presented in different ways. Now, deception is entirely acceptable for female figures to use. Cunning, craft. Athena herself uses this. Whereas a man is expected to do his virtuous acts more openly, exhibiting kleos in battle, for instance. And so Odysseus is interesting because he's more of a feminine hero, because he uses cunning and deceit, much like Athena does, and he's praised for this. So it's interesting to see the two accounts of virtuous conduct between the Iliad and the Odyssey. Achilles is very much of a manly man, because his prowess is in battle. It's not that he has no capacity for wisdom or speech. We will see that he does have that prowess, but he primarily exhibits it openly on the field of battle, and he despises people who merely talk like Odysseus does. Whereas Odysseus represents more of the feminine qualities of virtue, which Homer seems to equally prize. So the figure of Achilles makes one judgment, Odysseus makes another, and it seems like Homer seems to value both of them. And we can see that by the fact that the two epics are written by the same figure. But there's an open presentation here. So it just occurred to me, I didn't even get to the question of what an epic is. And I often, when I'm presenting this in class, I will interact with the class and ask them what they think an epic is. And because the word epic is used widely to this very day, and it's used to usually to describe something great. And it's usually in relation to a sporting event or, a great film or something like that. Well, that was epic. It's used as a descriptive phrase. That's not that's true of what we're saying about the epic here, but there's more to an epic in a literary sense than simply something that's great. An epic is a long narrative poem. And you might want to write this down as a definition here. It's a long narrative poem that treats a single historic figure or a group of figures. It's usually a single historic figure. The Iliad was about Achilles, the Odyssey about Odysseus, the Aeneid will be about Aeneas, the Beowulf will be about the figure of Beowulf, and it will present them in the context of a significant event, usually a war or a contest of some sort. And it tells these not only as having a conflict or war, but having this war is of monumental significance. So the Battle of Troy is recounted not only in Homer's accounts, it's told elsewhere. It's one of the great events of human history, the Battle of Troy. And so it's a mythic or even a legendary achievement that the hero is involved in, and it's central to the beliefs of its culture furthermore. And that's certainly the case in Greece. The Greeks recount this event at their central educational endeavors, as I say in the accounts of the great singers. The rhapsodes will tell the accounts of Troy and the figures that are around it as ancient history, mythic in their significance and exemplary in their conduct. And it will usually involve a whole oral tradition of a culture. Epic will, as I say, usually focuses on an individual, and the individual is held up as an exemplary role model for us to emulate. And so Achilles will be an example held up to all men for manly conduct. Likewise, Odysseus. But there's a whole range of things, I think, which mark an epic as well. And one of the features there, which I would say is foremost, given its educational importance, is the fact that it's encyclopedic as well. And by the word encyclopedic, I mean it includes everything that would be befitting to the education of a young person, paidos, encyclopaideia. And paideia is a culture. The word paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, is the Greek word for education. But it's a word that encompasses more than our word of conveying of information. It has to do with conduct, with moral action, with aesthetic views, with views on the nature of the gods, with views on the nature of the underworld. And we'll see that in Homer's Odyssey, we will have, well, we've already been told what happens in the Council of the Gods. We'll also go down to the underworld. It's a feature of all epics in the Greek tradition. The god not only does great deeds on earth, but he descends down to the underworld, the land of the dead, and rises up from the land of the dead. Again, a terrific feature, and again, not characteristic of any old great historic figures. Only a few figures have ever gone down to the dead and risen from it again, and Odysseus will be one such figure. So these are all characteristics of epics, and they use certain language that is used, like epic similes. So long, lengthy descriptions are characteristic of the language, and so is even the meter. Let me say that in conclusion before I move forward here. Even the language that's used in Greek is special and reserved for epics, and it's something called dactylic hexameter. I'm not going to spend too much time on that here. I'll just simply tell that to you. So 6 dactyls, hexameter, and it uses a very special vocabulary. So if you ever were to learn Greek, classical Greek, the Greek of, let's say, Plato or Aristotle, you would find that that was not adequate for reading Homer. You would have to learn specialist vocabulary that only Homer uses. And so this language, which is almost, so let me give an analogy. It would be like in modern English reading Shakespeare, who uses words that we don't recognize and uses them in ways that we're sometimes not quite sure what they even mean. That's something of akin to how Homer's Greek would read even to Plato. So it's an ancient language that has enormous aesthetic power, told in a meter that's reserved for this type of poem, and with strong resonances that are moving as well. So it's not just what the story tells, but how it is told. And I talked about the structure, but now I'm even talking about the very meter and the language that is used. So it's high and exalted language that we reserve for epics. Sometimes formulaic, like gray-eyed Athena. This is called an epithet. It's a form of description phrase, and probably the relic of the fact that it was an oral tradition that lies behind it. But as I say, let me go back to the account here. I still have a few minutes here. And I wanted to get through the first 4 books. We'll see whether I will ever succeed in that. I've never done so yet in my 17 years, but that's what I have asked you to do for the reading. But I left off with Athena having persuaded Zeus, to do something about getting Odysseus back home. And so she puts on sandals and goes out with Zeus's blessing to Ithaca to greet the family of Odysseus, who are pining and wondering where he is. And when she lands, having left Mount Olympus and descending and going all the way to Ithaca, which is it's on the west coast of Greece, where Zeus, or rather where Odysseus is considered to be the king. She finds rather, sorry, getting ahead of myself. She disguises herself. And what does she disguise herself as? Line 105. She was disguised as a friend, leader of the Taphians. Mentes is what it's called here in Lattimore's translation, but in its normal rendering, and we'll see it elsewhere here, mentor. So she disguises herself as a leader, a leading figure, a man to be admired. And there she found the haughty suitors, full of pride. Pride comes before their fall. And they, at the moment in front of the doors, were amusing their spirits with draughts games like checkers, sitting about on skins of cattle whom they had slaughtered themselves, Odysseus's cattle. And about them, of their heralds and hard-working henchmen, some at the mixing bowls were combining wine and water, while others again with porous sponges were wiping the tables and setting them out, and others cutting meat in quantities. In other words, they're eating him out of house and home, literally devouring his kleos, because kleos in Greece, I haven't mentioned this yet, fame is connected with 2 things. One with your virtue and your reputation for virtue, but another with your earthly possessions. So tied together with a man's arete, or his excellence, is not only his public reputation, but the physical fruits of that. So he'll be a wealthy man and a noble man. These things are the product of having great arete. And so by eating and dispossessing Odysseus of his wealth, they are effectively robbing him of his arete in the same way, and analogous to what Poseidon is doing. They're bringing about anarchy, and they're bringing about injustice in Odysseus's kingdom. So the injustice in Poseidon's actions in preventing Odysseus from coming home is being paralleled by the suitors' actions in dispossessing Odysseus of his great wealth. And they're sitting and presuming they're simply not leaving. So it's one thing to be a guest and an honored guest. It's another thing for a guest never to leave. Back to the book. Line 113. Now, far the first to see Athena was godlike Telemachos, his son. As he sat among the suitors, his heart deep grieving within him, imagining in his mind his great father, how he might come back and all throughout the house might cause the suitors to scatter and hold his rightful place and be lord of his own possessions. With such thoughts, sitting among the suitors, he saw Athena and went straight to the forecourt. The heart within him scandalized that a guest should still be standing at the doors. He stood beside her and took her by the right hand and relieved her of the bronze spear and spoke to her and addressed her in winged words. Welcome, stranger. You shall be entertained as a guest amongst us. Afterward, when you have tasted dinner, you shall tell us what your need is. What Homer is exhibiting here is good conduct on Telemachus's part. This is an expectation of the ancient world, universally, I will say, not only in the Mediterranean, but throughout the ancient Near East. We can see it in biblical times as well, that hospitality is to a stranger is regarded as a duty that is sacred. And he sees a stranger here, and he's scandalized by the fact that nobody is exhibiting any hospitality to the stranger. In fact, they're letting the stranger stand in their midst while not even greeting the stranger. But Telemachos knows better, and so he comes and greets the stranger, looks to his needs first before wanting to find out what the reason is for the stranger's presence. So is going to feed the stranger. And so speaking, Homer continues, he led the way, and Pallas Athena followed him. Now, when the two of them were inside the lofty dwelling, he took the spear he carried and set it against a tall column in a rack of spears of polished wood, where indeed there were other spears of patient-hearted Odysseus, standing in numbers, and he led her and seated her in a chair with a cloth to sit on. The chair, splendid and elaborate. For her feet, there was a footstool. For himself, he drew a painted bench next her. Note that her seat is better than his. Apart from the others, the suitors, for fear the guest, made uneasy by the uproar, might lose his appetite there among overbearing people. And so he might also ask him about his absent father. Note that at the heart of, and this is very subtly done by Homer, while Telemachus is observing the duties of hospitality, within his heart is the desperate need to know more about his father, and the hope, perhaps is a vain hope, as will turn out it's not a vain hope, the hope that he might have news about his long lost father. A maidservant comes along and does her duties, and then the suitors come in, and all of them just raucously come up, sit up with the benches, demand things, and are, once they're sated, then they get involved. But so the scene shifts back and forth, and note that Telemachus pulls Athena in the guise of mentor aside to not be disrupted by these things. So there's a little place of civilization in the midst of the anarchy, which in general now rules in Odysseus's own kingdom. What a terrible deed for one of the great heroes of Troy. He does a virtuous, terrific thing, which is reputed widely even amongst the gods, and yet he in his own kingdom, his whereabouts are unknown, and his kingdom is beset by anarchy. Grave injustice, which the goddess Athena will seek to set to right. But when they had put away their desire for eating and drinking, line 150, the suitors found their attention turned to other matters, the song and the dance. For these things came at the end of the feasting. A herald put the beautifully wrought lyre in the hands of Phemios, who sang for the suitors. Phemios, one of the two famous singers recounted in the Odyssey, the other being Demodocus. We'll meet him later. But Phemius sings because they made him to do so. He didn't want to play or entertain them. He wanted them to leave because he's loyal to his master. But he played his lyre and he struck up a fine song. Meanwhile, Telemachus talked to Athena of the gray eyes, leaning his head close to hers so that none of the others might hear him. Dear stranger, would you be scandalized at what I say to you? This is all they think of, the lyre and the singing. Easy for them, since they, without penalty, they eat up the substance of a man whose white bones lie out in the rain and fester somewhere on the mainland, or roll in the wash of the breakers. If they were ever to see him coming to Ithaca, all the prayer of them all would be to the lighter on their feet, instead of to be richer men for gold and clothing. As it is, he has died by an evil fate, and there is no comfort left for us. Not even though someone among mortals tells us he will come back. So now he's in a state of grieving and of despair. His day of homecoming has perished. But come now, tell me this and give me an accurate answer. What man are you? And whence? Where is your city? Your parents? What kind of ship did you come here on? And how did the sailors bring you to Ithaca? What men do they claim that they are? For I do not think you have traveled on foot to this country. And tell me this too, tell me truly, so that I may know it. Are you here for the first time? Or are you a friend of my father's from abroad? Since many other men too used to come and visit our house in the days when he used to go out among people. Then in turn the goddess, gray-eyed Athena, answered him. See, I will accurately answer all that you ask me. I announce myself as Mentes, mentor, son of Anchialus the wise, and my lordship is over the Orlovan Taphians. Now I have come in, as you see, with my ship and companions, sailing over the wine-blue water to men of alien language, to Temesi, after bronze, and my cargo is gleaming iron. And my ship stands nearby by the country over the city, and I'll skip over this bit. Your father and I claim to be guest friends by heredity from far back, as you would know if you went to the aged hero Laertes, who, they say, no longer comes to the city now, but away by himself on his own land leads a hard life with an old woman to look after him. This is Odysseus's father. He has been effectively exiled from the court, left to languish, not honored as the father of the king. And this old woman serves him his victuals and drink at the times when the weariness has befallen his body, from making his toilsome way on the high ground of his vineyard. He's still working in his old age. Now I have come. They told me he was here in this country. Your father, I mean. But no, the gods are impeding his passage. For no death on the land has befallen the great Odysseus, but somewhere alive on the wide sea he is held captive, on a sea-washed island, and savage men have him in their keeping. Rough men, who somehow keep him back, for though he is unwilling. Now, I will make you a prophecy, in the way the immortals put it into my mind, and as I think it will come out, though I am no prophet. Nor do I know the ways of birds clearly. He will not long be absent from the beloved land of his fathers, even if the bonds that hold him are iron. But he will be thinking of a way to come back, since he is a man of many resources. But come now, tell me this, and give me an accurate answer. Are you, big as you are, the very child of Odysseus? Indeed, you are strangely like about the head, the fine eyes, as I remember. We used to meet so often together before he went away to Troy, where others beside him and the greatest of the Argives went, in their hollow vessels. Since that time I have not seen Odysseus, nor has he seen me. Then the thoughtful Telemachus said to her in answer, "See, I will accurately answer all that you ask me. My mother says, indeed, I am his. For my part, I do not know. Nobody really knows his own father. But how I wish I could have rather been son to some fortunate man whose old age overtook among his possessions. But of mortal men, that man has proved the most ill-fated whose son they say I am, since you question me on this matter." So note the mindset of the young Telemachus here. He is so traumatized by the event, although he is told that he is the son of Odysseus, and he has no reason to doubt it. It's hard for him to actually accept the claim, because to accept the claim and the reality of it is to be in further pain. So he too is marked by pain as much as his father did. Now that pain will bring about a certain wisdom to him, and this one of the marks of Odysseus and his cunning is that he must also suffer before he comes home, and the suffering that accompanies his homeward voyage will also give him a greater wisdom, and it will allow him to, among other things, to hold his tongue, which is one of the reasons that it's taken him so long to return home. Remember, he reveals his name to Polyphemus, the Cyclops, which allows his father, Poseidon, to keep him away. "Ah, I know the man who's blinded my son, and I will keep you from getting home." But so Telemachus here says that he doesn't even know his father, and he says that, "Can any man do so?" Well, he's now generalizing based on his individual experience, and of course he can, but he has not yet ever seen him, and he's simply been told by others. And so he has no actual personal experience, and personal experience is essential to all good education. It's not simply that you can learn information in a classroom. You have to live out the things that you say and know to be true in order for them to be proofed on the pulses, to use Keats' famous phrase, by experience. And he has no experience. So one of the things Mentor is going to do here, to skip over the account a little bit, is to send him out from under his mother's skirts into the world abroad in order to find out further information about his father, in order to gain the knowledge and wisdom which Mentor says that he doesn't have, although we know that Athena doesn't know, in fact, where he is and what he's doing. But she is sending Telemachus out now to get some of the experience that he has not had by virtue of being back in his homeland and being effectively besieged by abusive men. So she's going to prepare him, knowing that he won't find Odysseus, prepare him nonetheless for the challenges and the difficulties he's going to encounter later on in the story, when he's going to stand at his father's side and fight against the suitors. First, he has to get some experience and toughen himself up a bit. So Telemachus here is starting to build a little bit of the character under the wise guidance of his mentor, who's going to guide him here. And Phemius now sings for the suitors, and he sings, interestingly, about the story of the war of Troy. And the parallel between Phemius, the singer, to Homer, the singer of the story of the Odyssey, is also apparent to the audience here. Phemius carries on, as I say, and tells the story of the Odyssey, line 326. And he sang, we're told, of the Achaeans' bitter homecoming from Troy, which Pallas Athena had inflicted upon them, says Phemius. Well, actually, he's not quite right. It's not Pallas Athena who inflicted it upon them. It is, in fact, Poseidon. But I haven't mentioned Penelope yet, other than naming her. Let's look at Penelope briefly here. The daughter of Icarius, circumspect Penelope, heard and heeded the magical song from her upper chamber, and descended the high staircase that was built in her palace. Not all alone, since two handmaidens went to attend her, when she, shining among women, came near the suitors. She stood by the pillar that supported the roof with its joinery, holding her shining veil in front of her face, to shield it, and a devoted attendant was stationed on either side of her. Why is she shielding her face? Because probably the tears are streaming down her face, and she's wanting to conceal that from the suitors, because to reveal her ongoing love of her husband would be to anger the suitors who want to have her hand in marriage. She can't pretend to be having any emotional allegiance to her husband. All in tears, she spoke then to the divine singer. She rebukes him. Phemius, since you know many other actions of mortals and gods which can charm men's hearts and which the singers celebrate, sit beside them and sing one of these, and let them in silence go on drinking their wine. But leave off singing this sad song, which always afflicts the dear heart deep inside me, since the unforgettable sorrow comes to me beyond others. So dear a head do I long for whenever I am reminded of my husband, whose fame goes wide through Hellas and midmost Argos. And now what does Telemachus say to her? Then the thoughtful Telemachus said to her in answer, Why, my mother, do you begrudge this excellent singer his pleasing himself as the thought drives him? It is not the singers who are to blame. It must be Zeus is to blame, who gives out to men who eat bread, to each and all, the way he wills it. There is nothing wrong in this singing, the sad return of the Danaans. People surely always give more applause to that song, which is the latest to circulate among the listeners. So let your heart and let your spirit be hardened to listen. Odysseus is not the only one who lost his homecoming day at Troy. There were many others who perished besides him. Go therefore back in the house and take up your own work, the loom and the distaff, and see to it that your handmaidens ply their work also. But the men must see to discussion, all men, but I most of all, for mine is the power in this household. So what's interesting here is that just from this one little encounter with Mentor, Telemachus now speaks like the man of the house, which indeed he is. He's of age, but he hasn't been able to act like it. And we'll find that he will also pick up the spear, which will suggest that he is in charge of the not the seer, the scepter of the kingdom. He will hold that later on, which suggesting that he's going to act more his age and act more in keeping with his position as well. And in book 2, we will move on, and a council is called for the first time since Odysseus left. And the council is a deliberative body where discussions are carried out in an orderly way. And the scepter, which is the scepter that of power, of sovereignty in the kingdom, is wielded by the person who's speaking. And in this case, it's Telemachus who will wield the scepter. And he sits in his father's seat, the seat being a position of authority. So he sits down in his father's seat, and he gives a great speech here in book 2. He falters a bit at the end, but nonetheless, he comes in, and Themis, the goddess of correctness and manners and tradition, enters in. And at this point in book 2, Antinous comes in and accuses Penelope of doing what she had in fact been doing, namely deceiving the suitors. And Penelope's answer is that to the suitors is that she's, as I said to you earlier, weaving a shroud for her father-in-law and would give them an answer when she finishes it. But of course, as I said, by night she unweaves this in a very crafty way. But the suitors have found out about this because one of Penelope's attendants has been sleeping with the suitors, and she's revealed this. And so the suitors say, you're going to finish this right now. We're going to force you to finish this. So now we're coming to a compressed time when a judgment is going to have to come. Either Penelope is going to have to marry one of the suitors, in which case Odysseus has lost his reputation, or Odysseus is going to have to come home and resolve the situation. So we're at a crisis point. 20 years on, all of that time mourning, but now a crisis point is going to come. And at this point, there is an omen, and the omen is of two eagles flying together and then attacking each other's. One of the suitors, Halitherses, interprets this omen as the coming home of Odysseus. Another, Eurymachus, says that they're just two ordinary birds, they don't mean anything. But one of them got it right, namely Halitherses. And the poet then, Homer, sets up reliable and objective criteria to judge who is right and who is wrong. Zeus sent the eagles, says Homer. So note that it's, again, just like in the case of Agamemnon, a notice has been given by the gods of what's coming, and yet men have ignored the omen that the gods have given, and they will pay the price for ignoring what has been fated. And Athena is now very active both in the life of Penelope, and Athena will speak to her, but also to Telemachus, who's not yet able to handle his own affairs, although he bears the image of his father in terms of his likeness, but of his guise, his appearance, but not yet in his character. And his character is of the utmost importance if he's going to stand as the man that he is to be, in order to stand the temptations and the trials against the suitors in battle, in open battle, where he will prove his manliness. So Athena comes on that voyage with him in the guise of mentor. And they go on two voyages, and I'm going to conclude right here. First one is to visit Nestor at Pylos, Pylos. Nestor is one of the companions, one of the old men, wise old men. We read one of his great speeches in Book 9 of the Iliad. And the second is to Agamemnon's brother Menelaus, who is the husband of Helen, and Helen's with him now, red-haired Menelaus, at Sparta. And he goes to they go to the wise man renowned for his wisdom and counsel, Nestor, and he gives them some counsel. And then they go to visit Menelaus, and Menelaus likewise does not know where Odysseus is, but nonetheless says that he most grieves the loss of Odysseus because of his greatness. And a sacrifice is made by Athena on behalf of Odysseus's family to Poseidon here. It's a hecatomb, it's 100 cattle, and it's an attempt to placate this here. At any rate, in Book 3, again, the story of Orestes and Agamemnon is told, and Orestes is held up as a model for Telemachus. So this is repeated. It's first told by the gods. Zeus himself tells of it, and then in Book 3, it's told again to Telemachus personally. So Homer, for the audience, is demonstrating the importance of justice. And in preserving human conduct, it's important even to the gods, and it's certainly important to men. Now, the Menelaus's castle, we're told about that in Book 4, and he has heard no glory stories of Odysseus. He has no idea. But even Helen tells of Odysseus's cunning and discretion here. So in what Telemachus is getting here, in addition to some worldly experience, is he is getting verifiable accounts from people who knew of his father, what a wonderful man he was. And of course, he himself is being encouraged by these things to be a man like his father was. And so we see a character development in the figure of Telemachus, which Homer would wish his own audience, who's hearing the entire tale, would also emulate, and they will do it by mimesis, imitation of an action that's paraded before them. But I'm going to conclude here and leave it off with that, and we'll pick it up next class on the island of Calypso, where we will meet the hero of the tale of the Odyssey, Odysseus himself. I will see you then.